Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the second in our series, Machnamh Bród. Machnamh is an old Irish concept that encompasses reflection, contemplation, meditation, and thought. This year, we thought that it would be a good opportunity for us, as we haven't had a Dublin Pride parade and we've had a bit of time off, to take some time to reflect on ourselves, on our community, and on the type of pride that we want to exist when we return to the streets in 2022. In our series, we've been looking at various areas of discrimination or exclusions that can exist within the LGBTQ plus community. Yesterday, we looked at areas such as racism and transphobia and some of the more obvious discriminations that sometimes exist. And today, what we want to do is talk about some of the discriminations and areas that cause exclusion that we might not always think about, but that can be just as negative and as harmful to the people that they exclude. In particular, we're looking at the areas of ageism and ableism. So this evening, we are joined by a wonderful panel. We have Brendan, who is a long-term volunteer and member of Dublin Pride, Kieran McKenny from Age and Opportunity, and formerly on the board of Dublin Pride, and Family Gay Health Network as well, and formerly lots of other groups. And we have Solday, who is from Full Spectrum Ireland, joining us today. So I think what I'm going to do is just start by giving everyone the opportunity to introduce themselves and just say a little bit about themselves. So I'd like to start with Kieran.
Okay, thank you. So I've been involved in when I began, I just knew it as gay activism or lesbian and gay activism, and now these days we talk about LGBTI plus activism. I came back to Ireland in 2005 to take up a post at Glen as director of gay HIV strategies, and then in 2009 I moved into the age sector mainly because firstly I felt, well, I'm becoming an older person, but secondly I was really aware that having worked for a long time with people living with HIV, with IV drug users, with sex workers, that in each of those work areas there was still a narrative around a human rights agenda. And I became really conscious that in the older age sector and our views of older people and aging in society, the human rights perspective is really limited, if it exists at all. So I'm thrilled to be here and to talk later about this whole concept of how we view aging and indeed how we experience ageism in Ireland. Thanks.
Thanks, Karen. Thanks. Solday, would you like to say a few words?
Thank you, Jed. I'm Isolde O'Brolachul Carmody, and I'm one of the founding members of Full Spectrum Ireland. We set up about 12 months ago, July of 2020, in order to provide a space specifically for people who identify both as disabled and as LGBTI+. There was quite a simple reason for that, and that's that we just felt like we didn't have another space.
Yeah.
I've been involved in, maybe 10 years ago, I was involved in organising with Northwest Pride. This year involved in setting up Leitrim Pride. It's going to be our first ever. And have ended up having to go back into disability rights activism just as a way to get my very fundamental day-to-day, can I actually survive rights. So I've always reckoned I've been forced into activism just by the sheer levels of exclusion in mainstream society. I also work as an artist and an arts facilitator, mostly in theatre and writing and things of that nature. So I'm delighted to be here. I'm delighted this discussion is happening. It's great.
No, thank you. Thank you so much. And last but not least, Brendan.
Thanks very much, Jed. It is a pleasure and an honour for me to be here today. When I started in this organisation, Dublin Pride, it happened in 2005. After 7 years of becoming a member of Belong to You service. Belong to You service was established by Machnamh Bród, the former director and founding director of Belong to You service. It was back then. It was described as a historic moment for young people who identify themselves as LGBTQI plus members of society. Between 99 to 2004, I've seen the incredible work that they belong to members, past members, new members coming into the doors of our house at 105 at Kibble Street. Just amazing work, and I'm just delighted to be here today. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Brendan. So I suppose I'm going to start straight in by asking the obvious question, and I'm going to start with you, Isolde. Is there a problem when it comes to inclusion of people with disabilities within the LGBTQ plus community and within Pride?
Yeah. You're lucky I'm here tonight. Last year when there was a Pride Inside, this same streaming platform was used and I couldn't participate. That's because I have to use specific technologies, specific software in order to be able to use a computer. I'm visually impaired. And the StreamYard 12 months ago was not compatible with those items software. And it was another discussion about inclusion and ableism, and I wasn't able to get there. So, my experience over the last couple of hours has been very much like decisions that I have to make if I want to go to an event, but there's no information about the building's accessibility. And if this was an in-person event, I wouldn't have bothered. I would just not have shown up because it's just too much stress. It is too much anxiety to go to the massive effort of getting myself out of my house with my power chair and my guide dog, go down, find a place that I haven't been to before, find the right door without being able to read any signs, and then discover that there's a bloody great step. So, and then have to turn around and go home again. That's just a daily experience for people in my position. And, I'm not that unusual. Likewise, though, there are plenty of other people with other issues around what their disabling experiences of society are. So, for example, particularly people on the neurodiverse spectrum would find large crowds and loud noises really distressing and really difficult to handle. So that's parades and clubs just out the window. So there's a lot of structural, I would call it structural ableism within the LGBTI plus community, and a lot of that is cultural. A lot of that is down to the way things have been done, the spaces that have been used. That said, though, I mean, this is 2021, and I understand that there is an official Dublin Pride hub which has an inaccessible basement, and I just can't understand that. I just can't understand how that has happened. And you were saying beforehand to be critical of Pride.
Yeah,
I'm going to be critical.
yeah. No,
but this is a lifetime of experience speaking here.
Yeah.
So.
No, we actually have a lift. So we do have a lift for the basement. At the moment it's just being used for setup for office, and then once it's used for any extra activities, we have a second door to the side which has a lift that comes directly into it. So we were conscious to have that.
Is that on your promotional material?
It might not be. So we will
exactly.
check that.
This is something that doesn't occur to people. If I'm looking at an event listing and it doesn't specify that a place is accessible, I will assume it's not. Yeah. Especially if it's somewhere I'm not familiar with.
No, so that's a fair point. Yeah.
Totally. So these are the kinds of exclusions that build up one on the other.
Yeah.
Also, I mean, I haven't been to Outhouse since the late 90s because that was the last time I could get upstairs.
Yeah. And I think that's something that's definitely a conversation that needs to be looked at more, because you're right when you say there's a culture and a history in that quite often queer spaces were hidden. So they were hidden in basements and down laneways and in places like that. But it's 2021. Do you think that Do you think that a lot of people would be in the same position, that they don't even bother trying anymore?
Absolutely, absolutely. Particularly anyone who has, let's say, of my age group, and possibly even a little bit younger, because we've grown up in an ableist society. And so ableism is the default assumption. Very much like people growing up as LGBTI in the 1960s and 70s. You have to assume that you're not welcome. You have to assume that events and institutions are not for you, because that's the way they've been constructed. So it takes conscious, deliberate work to change that. And that means outreach, and that means consultation, and that does mean having these conversations, however difficult they might be. And it means not shying away from cost and expense.
Yeah.
It's Judy Heumann, who's a long-time US disability rights activist, said that, passing the Americans with Disability Act in the US was the only time that a bit of civil rights legislation was in danger of not passing because of the expense. No other civil rights legislation was being questioned about how much it was going to cost.
Yeah. And Brendan, would you have any comments on that? Because this is something you'd be aware of as well.
I do agree with Sola. I think the whole aspect of being disabled, being gay, hasn't been highlighted over the years, and I feel strongly with this. But because I'm a member volunteer, and because I'm a member and I'm also a volunteer, I'm quite aware of these issues on a daily basis. Every year I come into this, every time I come into this festival, I really feel passionate that Dublin Pride has an opportunity to change how we approach people with disability. We have the Dublin bus, for example. 2 years ago, we introduced the accessibility for Dublin bus. Great opportunity. But for those who want to walk in the parade for the very first time, they should be allowed to walk in the parade. They should not be afraid to hide away because they are in a wheelchair. They should be allowed to walk with their peers. Like I've been walking with Dublin. I've been walking with belonged to when I was 16 years old. Very first time. Wow, that was going back 24 years ago. A lot has changed since then, but I think society in general is kind of picking up on the attitude toward people with disability. In 2019, the government has ratified the Convention on Persons with Disability for the very first time. This government, the previous government, has the latest legislation or the latest constitution in the last 10 years. Like I've seen my friends walking down asking for the government to stop cutting off PA hours, stop cutting off social welfare benefits. I see people being rejected in terms of getting employment. The figures are there, the statistics are there. So I'm just saying, I'm agreeing with Soda. There should be more. We at Dublin Pride volunteers and companies members should be aware of these issues and should be sensitive and be more approachable. Like I love to see a campaign during the month of June. It's like, I'm gay, I'm disabled, I'm bisexual. The disabled community has been hiding away for so long, and people with disability are calling out for change in terms of transportation, in terms of housing, in terms of employment for years. But that's my point. Yeah, I do agree with Alder.
Yeah. And Kieran, maybe, because I think this is something that is a crossover to maybe people who are older, because accessibility will have an impact on older people being able to get involved in events and activities. Is this something that you would have noticed?
Well, Sure, and Isolde, I was really taken or struck by when you said, was the access information included in like we have a program called Cultural Companions at Age and Opportunity, and so we list events taking place in in the olden days, pre-COVID, we always included access information. We'd always say there is a lift, there isn't a lift, there's 3 flights of stairs, etc., just so that the older people with whatever varying levels of ability could at least make a slightly more informed decision about whether they wanted to go. There's also then, I think, something about, and I mean, firstly, I want to say, thankfully, we've moved away from, do you remember that kind of hierarchy of need in the 90s when, you got full points if you were disabled, black, single, lesbian parent of 9 kids, that kind of thing. Like, we have moved away from that. We don't have to be competing with each other about our varying needs. And I think that is a really positive, development. And at the same time, I think that with ageism, it's much more subtle because it often isn't physical. I mean, it can be sometimes if, as an older person, I have reduced mobility, but then many older people don't. It can be more maybe about the imagery we use to promote who we are as a community and the messaging we use. But actually, I still think that the issue is squarely about society as much as our LGBT, QI plus community. So that like, in the sense, I'm less concerned about how I'm viewed as an older queer. I'm far more interested in how I'm viewed as an older person across the board, and I'm in my 60s. And I have to say that I've not really experienced much ageism, and I think that's because of advances we've made in society. But at the same time, with lots of older people, whether we're queer or not, there are all kinds of concerns about what happens to us when we get older and more infirm. And then as a queer person, if I ever needed to access residential care, then there comes a completely other layer of need to be catered to, but also to be expressed.
Yeah. No, and I suppose that is a huge concern when it comes to older LGBTQ plus people, in that we are the first generation that has a whole community of older LGBTQ plus people. It didn't happen before because people weren't out, and we almost had it. We almost had it a long time ago, but then the AIDS crisis killed off so many of the community. So we would have had, because of the impact of AIDS in the 1980s and 90s, we're 20 years behind where we ought to be when it comes to development. So that's definitely. Just a thing as well, just going back to some of the issues we talked there, Solveig, is what would you say are the main areas? Because accessibility is a huge area and is a very obvious area where discrimination and exclusion exists for people who have various disabilities. But outside of accessibility, within the community itself, are there other things that happen or other attitudes people might have that end up excluding people and making them feel unwelcome?
Well, this is, again, derives from the underlying ableism within wider society. As with many kind of smaller communities, sometimes that gets magnified, it gets intensified. But one of the sort of classic forms of ableism is that we are desexualized. We're often degendered. All you have to do is go into an accessible toilet and see that there's no gender symbol on the door, which is great nowadays, but in the days when it was men and women and disabled, it was a removal of our sense of our gender. And then you go inside, there's no sanitary towel machine, there's no condom machine, there's often not even a mirror. And all of this is a really physical built expression of ideas about what it means to be disabled. A lot of, particularly wheelchair users, because of the ideas around why you might be a wheelchair user, or why you might use a wheelchair, get complete strangers come up to them and ask if they are able to have sex. And actually, a few years ago, when I was doing work with Northwest Pride and we were looking at trans inclusion, I found there were very, very similar experiences between trans people and disabled people. Complete strangers believe they have a right to your medical history. They believe they have a right to ask you about your genitalia. And these are very fundamental indignities that really show what the underlying ideas are. Now, that said, I think that visibility is really important. And one role where the LGBTQI plus community could really come into its own is in really owning the intersectionality and of really putting forward that disabled people have a sexuality, have a gender identity. Because that clearly hasn't occurred to most people, you know?
No, I mean that's good, and it's actually that's part of the subject of tomorrow's discussion is looking at sexual discrimination and how we sometimes either we discriminate against or we sexualize people on the basis of different elements about themselves. And Kieran, I think that is something that also occurs with the older community as well.
For sure, and so, like, you know, I'm going to be 62 in 2 weeks' time. So
happy birthday.
I'm so what? And this is not just about us as queer folk. Like the whole of the, I'm going to now focus firstly on just the residential care system, the nursing home system. There is no
Which does affect a lot of disabled people too, by the way.
Absolutely is all that. Yeah. There aren't double beds in most places. So even if you go in as a couple, whether you're same sex or opposite sex couple, very often you may well have been accommodated in different parts of that institution. So it is firstly, I think, that as older people, we are not perceived as having a sexuality, let alone a sexual orientation. And, you know, there was a really beautiful campaign just recently by Rehab Northern Ireland, which was a series of short vignettes of older couples, I think 5 opposite sex and 1 same sex couple, just talking about their feelings for each other, both in terms of emotion and affection, but also desire. And I just thought, oh my God, we need more of this, you know. So for a start, there's and so then, you know, I mean, one of my concerns is, and now this is specifically about being seen as a gay man, and I'm gonna, because that's all I can talk about right now. If one of the lenses by which we're viewed is what we do with each other in bed or in the public loo or in the forests or the cruising grounds, you know, if we're defined by that, like, you know, 2 men fucking each other or having a blowjob, etc., and then if when we get older we're no longer seen as sexual, have we then stopped being gay? and you know, hands up, in the last year and a half I haven't had sex. You know, I've had 2 cam sex encounters and it doesn't work for me. So in fact, I was joking with some friends. This is the longest period of time I've gone without sex since I was on chemo 11 years ago. You know, so all I can say is I'm so glad I'm in my 60s, because otherwise I'd have been crawling the walls. But have I stopped being gay? No. You know, at all. And like obviously that's a rhetorical question. But if the way we're perceived is just about that dirty act that we sometimes do. And it's also, I think it's even at a different layer then, if people who with disabilities aren't even seen as being at that particular party. And I completely agree with you about this kind of sense that people think that you can ask a trans person, oh well, have you had a top job and the bottom job or whatever? Like it's nobody's bloody business.
No,
I agree. It's no one's business. I don't want to. That is a personal violation of the privacy. So I agree with you, Claire. I totally agree with you. Okay, when I was young, probably 18 or 19, I had a boyfriend who I met and belonged to, and we were told we look different. He was able-bodied, I was disabled, and I was getting more and more looked upon than he was. I said, and we were kissing and snogging outside our house just on a Sunday afternoon, and I said, this is normal. Why am I being looked upon differently?
No, and I think that's something that people don't always realize, is that glance you give to someone on the street because you have seen somebody who looks different, who's older, they're doing something. That glance where you're slightly judgmental, people can see that. People can pick up on it, and it has a very. You can't see it.
I go out my friends to tell me.
Your friends will tell you, but there is that thing of sometimes we may be unaware, but that comment, that glance, can have a hugely negative impact on someone. Do you think as well, just I suppose in both when it comes to relationship, sexuality, that the lack of inclusive spaces for meeting has that negative impact down the line? Because if you take, for example, we spoke earlier about a lot of our venues and our locations are culturally based. We were down the back of alleys, we were in basements, and one of the things I noticed over the past lockdown was that all the queer spaces in Dublin were gone. And even during last summer when we had a reprieve and outdoor dining was back, or indoor dining even for a while, there was no queer space in them. So everybody got something back. Everyone got their restaurants, their favourite bars, because they all had these outdoor areas, whereas the gay venues were spaces that didn't have outdoor dining, didn't have food facilities. So we ended up with nothing. And I think I suppose the question is it time for us to start looking at what we define as queer spaces going forward, so that we don't get stuck with this problem again?
If I could jump in on that one. I would like everybody to remember back to March of last year when lockdown first happened. Your choices were taken away. Things like getting the shopping in became quite a logistical battle. There was rules about who you could see, where you could see them, and how you could see them. Welcome to our world.
Okay.
I've been in lockdown since 2007.
Yeah.
And I haven't had... sorry, Brendan, I haven't had sex in that time either.
Oh.
Since I started using a wheelchair.
Okay.
And now it's partly that those queer spaces that, I have sat in an after Pride party in a physically accessible venue. I can't see whether any of my friends are in there, so I plonk myself down beside the door so that if any of my friends, anyone who knew me, came by, they could stop and say hello. I was there in my power chair, which means that I'm at crotch height. I was there with my massive Alsatian guide dog who loved sprawling in the middle of floors. And all of these drunk people were walking in, either tripping over my guide dog, falling over me, or if they spotted me, literally jumping away as if they were going to catch something off me. It was a horrible night, absolutely horrendous. So you know, there's a lot of different issues that go on there. So that's not a good place for me to pick somebody up.
Sure.
Also, all of the online dating apps, same problem. They're all completely visual. They do not have accessibility built into them, even though I've had conversations, because I do email app developers and I tell them what the problem is and I say, please fix this in your update, and then they ignore me. So yeah, how am I supposed to find a girlfriend? And I live in Leitrim. We've got I'm just, all my possibilities are really, really small.
and Leitrim is the lesbian capital of Ireland, I thought.
Well, the thing about Leitrim is that there's loads of older gay couples. This is one of the differences between urban and rural, is that a lot of older couples actually retire down the country to live the good life. So, yes, I know plenty of lesbians. They're all in couples.
Yeah.
And I'm not one for poly, so, you know, again,
Okay.
all my options are really limited. And I have really specific taste. So maybe it's my fault. I don't know.
I would just go back to what Zolan said. In the last 22 years or 24 years, there hasn't been a fully accessible wheelchair disabled nightclub in Dublin. Now, I would love to see something like that once a month. So we have a space to go into the George or to Pandy Bar just for one night, once a month, and you know, as a new venue, because I know there is a lot of problems when we go into nightclubs. We've been told, "Oh, you've been stopped by a specific bouncer." I'm not going to say who. I'm not going to say where, but I've been stopped several times. Now, I haven't been drinking for several years, and it's been said, "Hi, my name is Brendan. I want to go in." "Oh, sorry, you can't go in. You look drunk." I'm not drunk. I'm not drunk at all.
Yeah.
So that's one of the issues that people with disability are finding the barrier. And I think it's all right. I think we should have more disabled queer space, like nightclubs, for them to go into to see their friends and have something like that. Dublin City is to be honest, Dublin City buildings is not fully accessible in certain areas in Dublin City. That's just my opinion, but I don't know what Zola would say, because she's from Leitrim, and I think Leitrim people are gorgeous. Anyway, that's just me. That's just me. But I think what Dublin Pride should be doing, Jed and Kieran, is highlighting where can we host a disabled nightclub for our disabled LGBT members. Where can we hold it? And that should be one of the key areas that Dublin Pride should be highlighting in terms of leading up to the parade, leading up to the festival. You know, that would be great. If I can work with them, if I can work with you to make that happen with Lisa and Cormac, I'd be saying, come and join us, you know, that kind of stuff. Because I think, in general terms, nightclubs in general do not have a wheelchair toilets. They may have toilets downstairs, not possible. They may have ramps. They don't have ramps, so it can't go outside for smoke. We have to go outside in terms of the main entrance, which is not safe. You know, I was very surprised to see. Not going to criticize the young people in Georgia last week, but I was saying to myself, if a group of disabled LGBT members was drinking on the streets of Dublin, well, that would be a big headline in the news. You don't see that. You don't actually see that.
No.
Yeah. No, and I think like that leads into the whole area of visibility, which we've come back to, is if you never see a group of people, you sometimes think they don't exist.
Yeah.
And you don't realize that you don't see them because you excluded them. And it's only when you open the conversation up, because like you said before, sometimes when it comes to, especially when it comes to areas of accessibility, it's very expensive, and sometimes people will say, well, there's not that many people, I've never seen anyone who's disabled, so there isn't a demand for it. But it's a whole chicken and egg thing of we have excluded people so we're not visible, but we're not aware of the fact that actually there are thousands of people in Ireland who have a form of disability, hundreds of thousands in fact. And I think that's like, these are the things that we say, well, this is what we want to see as a change within Dublin Pride when it comes to the big festival, but within the community itself, is coming up with ideas like that, like Brendan had. Well, let's say for 2022, when we're back and we have nightclubs, like, let's make the commitment now and say we're going to have at least one club night. Not just an event that's talking about stuff, but a club night where you can actually go and have a dance and maybe have a snog and meet somebody. Yeah. Well, let's make the commitment now that that's the thing we're going to do. Because again, this is the whole point of this series, is it's not just to point out all the things that are wrong. It's learning from what's the solution, what do we do next?
Could I make that?
Sorry, do you want to go ahead there, Kieran?
Sorry.
Okay, Zolda, if it's okay, I just wanted to make a point about the cost. So a little while ago, we were facilitating an online meeting, and we booked signers so that a deaf person could take part. And then, unfortunately, that person wasn't able to take part because of broadband issues. So we paid the fee, and one of my colleagues then said, "Oh, that was a bit unfortunate." And then what my colleague said was, "We have to make sure that we don't then suddenly think we go to all that trouble and then they couldn't make it." And I thought that's exactly the learning. We went to that trouble because in fact we should do that. And the fact is that somebody couldn't make it is the same as if the bloody trains broke down, or if somebody got a puncture or whatever. It was unfortunate that we didn't get that person's participation, but the fact that the cost that it cost us is neither here nor there. We need to acknowledge that, and we need to build that into our normal day-to-day costing.
Yes. And I think particularly anyone who is receiving state funding, because Irish Sign Language is now a recognised official language of Ireland, and yet the cost of interpretation is so huge, especially for community organisations.
Yeah.
So I would say that anyone who is applying for government or state funding, put in the cost of ISL interpretation, regardless of whether you're planning to use it or not, because they need to know that this is part of it. This is part of what it means to actually run something for the people.
And I think we're better at that in the queer community because there are so many. We have a higher proportion of deaf people in our community. So, I was so proud when I moved back to Ireland in 2005 to just see there were signers at every public event, practically. Kind of going, fucking hell, I didn't see that in London. So
yeah, you still don't.
I think we should be really proud of that.
Yeah, and I think that's an area where we've been conscious. We're not 100% there yet.
Yeah.
I think we would like to have every single event signed.
Yeah.
Obviously, with online, we have the advantage of those captionings, but it's not the same as signing. But the commitment is there that the Pride Parade, the Pride concerts, the mainline events, that we will always have them signed. And as each year has gone by, we've increased the number. And I think a lot of that has been down to quite often personal relationships where we were very close with the signers who looked after us and gave us advice and gave us very good deals. But then that can have a negative effect because for other people, that is, because if you're not a close friend of someone who's organising Pride, then maybe your views aren't being heard because you don't have the ear of the organiser.
Exactly.
which is when it comes to all various other elements of disabilities and anything that could exclude someone. I think that's why a conversation like this is important, is to throw it out to everyone, to let them know, tell us what the things are that we need to fix, because we don't automatically assume them. And that's the whole problem with these types of discrimination, is they exist because people haven't realised that they're doing it. And so long as, once people are given the opportunity to make the change, then it's a case of making sure that they do make it.
Yeah, and can I just add there, when you're talking about committing to, having at least one sort of club night next year that is, specifically aimed at including disabled people, that you include disabled people in the planning. Because that's, one of the keys to access is just bloody ask, And for example, like, if you had asked me last week, I would have told you that StreamYard is problematic, Facebook is problematic, Instagram, no blindies, and that even things like only getting information about an event a few hours before rather than a few days before, that has a big impact. Because remember that whole business of having to go out shopping and remember your mask and your hand sanitizer, and making sure that you knew exactly where you were going and how long it's going to take you. That's us every day doing anything. So, and that includes logging on to an online event. It's not as simple as just pressing a button. It never is. What I was saying about nightclub, they should have do a monthly nightclub as a pilot scheme and see how it goes. Not just one, but have a monthly event once a month and see how it goes. That's what I was trying to say, Jed. Sorry.
That's definitely putting out there, because again, if spaces aren't accessible, people won't visit them. If they're not even there in the first place, well, then how is anyone going to do it?
Yeah.
And Jed, could I just share something which was, I think now probably 3 years ago at Gaze, wonderful, film festival. And at the end of the evening, I noticed that most of the men were heading back into Capel Street, and myself and Bill and a few of my friends, we just went into the local bar, Oscars. And honestly, I swear we had one of the best evenings ever, because the music was fantastic and we were dancing men and women together, which I haven't experienced for a very long time. And I think that is an analogy for more of us dancing together and being together. I had the greatest crack, and just kind of going, well, I remember that it used to be like this at one stage in the 80s, when we didn't have men only and women only. Well, we didn't have, we had a mixture of men and women and shared spaces. And like, I found it uplifting, just like dancing with total strangers, but just kind of going, come on, this is good crack, the music is great, and now obviously that's not the same thing if you have a mobility issue, but what I'm trying to say is that it was just about different parts of the community coming together to have fun, so.
By the way, one of my artistic professions is a dancer, by the way, so I do dance.
And she's a very good singer as well. So
we'll get you performing then next Pride up on the stage.
I did perform in Pride 2004, I think. I was fire dancing at the time, so that
would have been down in civic offices on Woodkey.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, we've moved on since then. But hopefully we'll get back there one day, even just to do a smaller event. Yeah, and then I suppose we've kind of looked at some of the things that we need to do when it comes to creating more inclusion. And I think accessibility and visibility seem to be the two big things that are coming out when it comes to that. And actually dancing with someone, like, not just because you want to have sex with them, but go up and dance with whoever's dancing on the dance floor. That's what you want to do. But this year in particular, I think over the last 18 months, there've been certain sectors of society have been disproportionately affected by COVID. But Kieran, this is something that I think the older community in general have experienced.
Well, absolutely. And so, I mean, so literally, kind of advert for my day job, we got funding from the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission, IREC, and we're hosting a number of online citizens' assemblies to explore with older people the effects of COVID restrictions and in particular cocooning. So we will be posting on social media about these soon. The first one starts on the 15th of June, but we decided we didn't want to advertise them too much in advance, just because so many of us go, oh yeah, that looks great, and then you kind of forget about it, you know. So we'll be doing social media advertising in the next week. And then related to that, we also got funding from Comic Relief to carry out a study on the digital divide among older people. So, because that is very often, for many of us, it's an exclusion that is often influenced by, well, firstly or possibly partly by age, but also by other factors like socioeconomic status, education, and like national broadband infrastructure. Mm-hmm. But just to give you an example, we had a course running, which was focusing on older persons with serious health conditions, etc., in a particular part of Dublin. After COVID, when we had to go online, we lost 80% of our participants because they didn't have the capacity to engage with us. And while there is a very real narrative about, oh Jesus, older people are fantastic with all these silver surfers and stuff. In fact, that's only part of the picture, So there's a whole cohort of us, whether it's as older people or people who don't have the financial resources or the educational resources to engage online. And I really think that that's as serious a literacy issue now as being able to read and write, Mm-hmm. And I think that's a collective issue. That's not just about older people,
Yeah, definitely impacts on disabled people in much the same way. Lower educational attainment. Most of us live below the poverty line, and I'm living in the country, so it's my mobile phone that's allowing me to connect up here. Fixed line broadband, what's that? But also then you factor in things like assistive tech, which costs my screen reader cost about 750 quid. And there's other bits of assistive tech that I can't get because they cost thousands, and there is no funding, no funding.
Yeah.
So I would like a 40-cell braille display. It costs 5,500.
Wow.
So I don't get to use braille.
Yeah.
Yeah. And even braille is a human rights issue for people who are blind. When it goes to polling stations, every 4 years there's a general election. We need to provide these crucial services for those who are blind and those who can't see. It's a fundamental right.
But things like the assistive tech, that's one where I think a lot more older people are impacted, because the vast majority of people with low vision are older people. Actually being born with a visual impairment is the rarity. So as people get older, and particularly things like AMD, age-related macular degeneration, which is actually very similar to my own eye condition, a double divide then for older people if they don't have the basic computer literacy, and then don't have access to the assistive tech to make it better as well, and then there's a lack of online accessibility just because people design websites really badly, so there is a lot of crossover between the exclusionary factors for disabled people and those for older people.
Sure.
However, I think both communities have suffered from being confused with one another.
Yeah.
Older people get their capacities underestimated because it's assumed that they are frail, or that they wouldn't be interested in all of this going outside of your house business, because that's all for the young crowd. And likewise, being a young person with a disability, you do get treated as though you are 80 plus. I've been in old people designated housing. Loads of young people end up in nursing homes because there's no suitable housing for them.
Wow.
Or no supports, in-home supports that facilitate them living at home, even if their home is accessible. And I battled with a lot of this over, I'm finally getting to the stage where I probably will be more suitable to the older people's services. But, being younger and trying to navigate that is incredibly frustrating. I've had the single bed in my council house. I've had the single, actual metal framed hospital bed being offered to me. Now, I covered it in glittery vinyl, but it was still a single bed,
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And for me, Jed, over the years when I was in belong to, I was not told I was not being treated differently. It was just the way they talked to me as a person with a disability. I said, I'm gay, I'm proud, but I didn't come across as disabled. I am disabled. I was born with a condition of cerebral palsy from meningitis from birth.
Yeah.
And when my parents, and I would just like to know, I was born on New Year's Eve on the same year of the first parade in Dublin in 1983. So I'm 40 years old in 3 years' time. So I'm very happy to say that. But I didn't experience any negative things about my life because I'm very positive, I'm very committed, I'm very open-minded. But I do what I do for the community. It's just attitude towards me. If I had a partner who hasn't a disability or is a disability, we would. I had a boyfriend for 5 years, and he had autism. He was picked upon. He was tormented while we were in a relationship. For me, no, I was seen as a normal person because I was able to walk. He had autism, so he was mumbling. And I'm not blaming the autism people. I think they're very good people, they're very intelligent people, but it's just attitudes. Going to a nightclub and say, what's wrong with him? What's wrong with me? No. Yeah. It's just that attitude towards us as a community. It has affected me. But I've been involved with politics, Jed. I've been very involved with politics, so I know exactly what I'm talking about. But the Paralympics, for example, we in Ireland we have a number of amazing athletes, amazing athletes, amazing swimmers who's going to Tokyo this year. These are our heroes, and they are only being featured once every 5 years. They're training, they're doing everything, so they need to be acknowledged. Everyone who has a disability should be acknowledged, regardless of what disability they have. They should be acknowledged by us as a community. We can learn something. We can learn something from them.
No, this is exactly. Well, I have had a wonderful time talking to everyone. I think you may not realise how fast the time has flown. We're almost up at an hour. I'm not sure. I don't think we have any questions in the chat box. If anyone have any questions, they can throw them in. But I think some of the main points that we've learned this evening is accessibility and visibility are key things, and everything comes from that. If we have accessibility so people can actually be there, visibility is needed so that people know that they're welcome there. We've learned a few other
and then cultural values, so that we're expressing welcome and inclusivity.
And again, I would love to see. I would love to see. This is one of my things. If we can do this next year, I would love to see a gay grand marshal for a very first time walking down the streets of Dublin with us behind us. No, that'd be great. No.
Yeah. No, I don't know. But yeah, we have some practical things, and I think this is the thing: is we have a list, and we need to start putting the list down, and then making sure that we are ticking everything off. That we are, whether that's making sure that we list accessibility options on all menus, making sure that we make our websites and our tech more accessible. But we need to start sticking to it. The other big thing that we also learned is that people, no matter how old they are and what level of ability or disability, they have sex. So don't ignore that. In 1973, the first LGBT organisation in Dublin was called the Sexual Liberation Movement.
Yeah.
It's a part of the human thing. So again, that's something that we shouldn't ignore.
Well, I would say this. I would say this. See the ability, not the disability.
Yeah.
See us as ability, and asset, not a problem by society. Make us feel welcome, etc. We have lots to offer. No.
We have lots to offer. So I'm going to give everyone a last word. Brendan, you can go first with the last word. What do you want to see most for Dublin Pride 2022?
Well, my boyfriend kissing me on stage.
Excellent. So what do you want most? What do you want to experience most for Dublin Pride 2022?
Not to be stood on and fallen over, and on any dance floor or in any parade. I did have a friend tell me, like, last time I was at Dublin Pride was after the marriage equality referendum, and as part of Yes Equality Leitrim, we were supposed to be leading the parade out, all 5 of us. But a friend has since told me she spent the entire parade fending people off my assistance dog, telling people not to interfere with the dog. She was literally a few steps behind me. I didn't know this. I didn't know her at the time. She was a few steps behind me and just telling people not to bloody well interfere with the dog. So yeah, being treated like a human and, part of the community, not some kind of token or, special effort. Just, you want me there because I'm part of the community.
Yeah, no, and that's a very fair thing to ask. It's a simple request. And the last word, Kieran, what do you want to see most for 2022?
Okay, so this isn't for me personally, but I think, we should have a culture where it's okay to express preferences, but that we are more aware of expressing them in a way that doesn't oppress anyone. So, being able to say, I'm more into guys my own age, rather than saying I'm not into twinks, or I'm more into skinny guys rather than saying no chubs, etc., etc. That we develop a much better literacy among all of us about this. So, because it's okay to have preferences, but it's not okay to put other people down, So.
And it's, I would say it's not okay to fetishize an entire group of people. This is an issue that a number of disabled people have, especially on same-sex dating apps, that there is a fetishization of disability. So, you either don't disclose your disability and then somebody resents you for that when they discover, or just, ghosts you when they discover, or you end up with the creepy fetishist who is not treating you like a human being.
Yeah.
So
that is so important. Absolutely. Yeah.
And thank you. You gave me the perfect introduction for tomorrow, which is the last in our series, Machnamh Bród, where we look at sexual discrimination, whether it be exclusion or fetishization within communities. So that was lined up perfectly. Brilliant. Thank you, everyone, and hopefully this is the first of many discussions we're going to be having on subjects like this. Thank you, Brendan. Thank you, Kira. Thank you, Isolde. Happy Pride, everybody. And if you haven't already seen it, the Dublin Pride Guide is now available in the Pride Hub in print format. Anyone can pop in and collect it, or just go onto the website and order a copy to be sent out. We have come a very long way in the last 50 years, but we are by no means there yet, even between ourselves. So I'm going to wish you all a happy Pride for the rest of this month. I'll be doing it every day. Thank you very much. Bród Hannah.
Hey.